The first thing she ever asked me to promise had nothing to do with love. It happened while we were sitting on the floor of our apartment, surrounded by half-open moving boxes and cheap takeout containers. We had been engaged for less than a week. I remember thinking this was what happiness looked like: messy, ordinary, permanent. She looked at me for a long time before saying, "There's one thing I need from you." I laughed and said, "If it's about putting the toilet seat down, I can manage." She didn't smile. "Please don't ask questions about my life before you. If I want you to know something, I'll tell you." The request felt strange, but not alarming. Everyone has a past. Everyone has things they regret. I reached for her hand and said, "We all have chapters we'd rather leave closed." She squeezed my fingers so tightly it almost hurt. "You mean that?" "I do." Looking back, I realized that wasn't a promise. It was permission. Permission for secrets to grow quietly between us while I mistook silence for trust. For a while, life gave me no reason to question that promise. She was affectionate in ways that felt genuine, remembered tiny details about my day, and somehow knew exactly when I needed space. My family adored her. My mother kept telling me I'd found someone steady, which was the highest compliment she could give. Still, there were moments that didn't quite fit. She never let me post old photos of us unless she approved them first. She avoided certain parts of town without explaining why. Whenever someone recognized her in public, she became tense for a split second before forcing a smile and introducing me as if nothing was wrong. I noticed it. Then I explained it away. She had changed jobs twice before we met. Maybe she had unpleasant coworkers. Maybe an ex still lived nearby. Everyone carries ghosts. One evening I casually asked where she had lived before moving here. She hesitated. Then she smiled. "Remember your promise?" I nodded immediately. I told myself respecting boundaries was part of loving someone. I had no idea that every unanswered question was quietly becoming part of a much bigger lie. About 8 months after our engagement, I noticed something that should have meant nothing. We were making dinner when her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. She was in the other room, and I wasn't trying to snoop. I only glanced because the screen kept flashing. The notification showed just a few words. "He keeps asking about you." No name. Just an unfamiliar number. Before I could even think about it, she rushed into the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and turned the screen over. "You read that?" she asked. "Only by accident. It wasn't meant for you." Her voice wasn't angry. It was frightened. I asked who he was. She immediately reminded me of my promise. No questions about before us. That answer bothered me more than the message itself. For the first time, I wondered whether I had confused trust with blind obedience. That night she barely slept. Every vibration from her phone made her sit upright. When I asked if everything was okay, she kissed my forehead and whispered, "Please, just let the past stay where it belongs." I wanted to believe her. Instead, something inside me quietly stopped believing anything at all. After that night, I started noticing things I had ignored for months. She always kept her phone face down. She deleted notifications before opening them. If I walked into the room while she was texting, the conversation ended instantly. None of those things proved anything on their own, and I hated the person I was becoming. I didn't want to be the paranoid fiancé checking every expression and every pause in a conversation. So I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. Then, one Saturday afternoon, we were shopping for furniture when a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, ran toward my fiancé. For a second, my fiancé looked completely frozen. The child smiled and shouted, "I knew it was you." Before I could even react, a woman hurried over, grabbed the girl's hand, and quietly said, "Come on. We need to go." Neither adult looked at me. My fiancé stood perfectly still until they disappeared into the crowd. I asked if she knew them. Her face turned pale. No. It was the fastest answer she had ever given me. And somehow, it sounded rehearsed. I couldn't get that little girl out of my head. It wasn't just that she recognized my fiancé. It was the way she had smiled, like she was running towards someone she genuinely knew. Kids don't fake that kind of excitement. For days, I replayed the scene in my mind. Finally, I asked again. This is about the girl from the store. Please just tell me who she was. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she started washing dishes that were already clean. I told you from the beginning, she said quietly. Don't dig into my past. I'm not digging. I'm asking about something that happened right in front of me. She set the plate down so hard it cracked in the sink. You promised. I also thought we were building a life together. The room went silent. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Fear. Not the fear of losing me. The fear that I was getting too close to something she had spent years trying to bury. That was the moment I realized the truth wasn't behind us anymore. It had already followed us home. Everything finally cracked open because of a mistake. A week later, my fiancée left her laptop at home when she rushed to work. She called, asking if I could bring it to her office because she had an important presentation. I wasn't looking for anything. I opened it only to make sure it was charged. An email notification appeared in the corner of the screen before I could close the lid. The subject line read, regarding Emily's school records. Emily. We had never talked about an Emily. Curiosity turned into dread. I clicked. The message was from a private elementary school confirming that her request to receive academic updates had been approved. It addressed her by name and referred to her as the child's mother. I stared at the screen, convinced I had misunderstood. Maybe it was another relative. Maybe she was a legal guardian. Then I saw the attached birth certificate. Her name was listed under mother. I felt every ounce of air leave my lungs. She hadn't hidden an old relationship. She had hidden an entire child. And suddenly every promise I'd made to respect her past felt like the very thing that had allowed the biggest secret of my life to survive. I don't remember driving to her office. I only remember gripping the steering wheel so hard that my hands ached. By the time I walked into the parking lot, I had already convinced myself there had to be an explanation that made sense. When she saw me, she smiled. Thanks for bringing. I held up the laptop. Who is Emily? The smile disappeared instantly. People were walking past us, laughing, carrying coffee, completely unaware that my world had just split in half. She whispered, not here. I've been asking you to tell me the truth for months. It's complicated. No, I said. It's either your daughter or it isn't. She covered her face with both hands. For several seconds, she didn't speak. Then, barely above a whisper, she said the words I had been praying not to hear. She's my daughter. I felt physically sick. You were going to let me marry you without telling me? Tears streamed down her face. I kept waiting for the right time. There isn't a right time to tell someone you've hidden your child. She didn't argue. She just cried, and somehow that silence hurt even more than any excuse could have. We drove home without saying much. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument. As soon as the front door closed, she broke down before I could even ask another question. I wanted to tell you, she said through sobs. I just didn't know how. Start now. She sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor. She told me she had given birth in her early 20s. The relationship with Emily's father had been toxic, full of manipulation and constant fighting. When it finally ended, he fought for custody with the help of his wealthy parents. According to her, she lost. Emily had been raised by her father and grandparents, while she was allowed limited contact for years. Eventually, even that became complicated. I thought if you knew, she whispered, you'd leave. I couldn't even process everything she was saying. So that little girl at the furniture store. She nodded. She recognized me. And you looked me in the eyes and lied. She closed her eyes. I know. That was the first honest answer she had given me all day, and somehow it hurt more than every lie that had come before it. I wanted to believe that was the whole story. A hidden daughter was already enough to destroy everything I thought I knew, but something still didn't fit. If she had simply been afraid of rejection, why did everyone react with so much panic whenever her past came up? I asked her one question. Does Emily's father know we're getting married? She didn't answer. Instead, she started crying again. That silence gave me my answer. Finally, she nodded. He found out a few months ago. How? He saw a photo online. I felt my stomach tighten. So the messages. They were about him. What did he want? She rubbed her eyes and whispered, he said I couldn't keep pretending none of this happened. I asked whether they were still in contact. Only about Emily. I wanted to trust her. I really did. But trust isn't something you can switch back on after it's been shattered. Every sentence sounded incomplete. Every explanation felt carefully measured. For the first time since we met, I realized I wasn't just listening for the truth anymore. I was trying to figure out how much of it was still missing. 2 days later, the missing pieces found me instead. I was at work when an unknown number called. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. A man's voice asked, "You're the guy she's engaged to?" I didn't say anything for a second. Then he sighed. I figured she still hadn't told you everything. My heart started racing. Who is this? I'm Emily's father. I walked outside because my knees suddenly felt weak. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening me. He sounded exhausted. I don't want your relationship, he said. I just think you deserve the truth before you marry her. I asked what truth. There was a long pause. She didn't lose custody because I was rich. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. Then why? Ask her why the judge said she couldn't provide a stable home. Before hanging up, he added one sentence that haunted me for days. If she can hide her daughter from the man she loves, imagine what else she's convinced herself is acceptable. I stared at my phone, realizing the nightmare wasn't over. It was getting bigger. I spent the entire evening rehearsing what I wanted to say. Every version sounded either too angry or too desperate. By the time she came home, I wasn't interested in catching her in another lie. I just wanted one conversation where I didn't have to guess what was real. She saw my face and immediately knew something had happened. He called you, didn't he? So you knew he might. She closed the front door slowly and leaned against it. What did he tell you? That you didn't lose custody because of his money. She looked down at the floor. Is that true? Another long silence. Finally she whispered, partly. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What does partly even mean? She wiped away tears before they could fall. I was struggling after Emily was born. I couldn't keep a job. I moved 3 times in 1 year. I was depressed and making terrible decisions. So you lied. I simplified it. No, I said quietly. You rewrote it. She covered her mouth and started crying again. For the first time, I wondered whether she had begun believing her own version of the past or whether she simply hoped I would. That night lasted until nearly sunrise. We sat across from each other in the living room, neither of us willing to go to bed because we both knew nothing would feel normal again. I asked her to tell me everything from the beginning. No shortcuts. No edited version. She admitted she had spent years trying to erase that period of her life. Therapy had helped her function, but instead of learning how to talk about the past, she had learned how to avoid it. Every serious relationship ended the moment she mentioned Emily, so eventually she stopped mentioning her at all. I convinced myself I was protecting what we had, she said. You were protecting yourself. She nodded without arguing. Then she looked at me with completely exhausted eyes. I never cheated on you. I believed her. Strangely, that wasn't enough anymore. The betrayal wasn't another man. It wasn't an affair. It was discovering that the woman I planned to marry had decided I couldn't be trusted with the truth. Once I understood that, every happy memory became harder to hold on to because I no longer knew which version of her had been standing beside me all those years. A week later, we met with my parents because I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. They had already noticed something was wrong. We had postponed meetings with the wedding venue, stopped talking about invitations, and barely answered anyone's calls. My mother listened quietly while I explained everything. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she looked at my fiancé and asked only one question. Why didn't you trust him? My fiancé started crying again. I was afraid he'd leave. My father spoke before I could. And now? Nobody answered. The silence said enough. After we drove home, she admitted something that hurt almost as much as the secret itself. I kept thinking that if we got married first, you'd be less likely to walk away. I stared at her, unable to believe what I had heard. So you wanted a wedding before the truth? She nodded. Not because she wanted to trap me, she insisted, but because she thought marriage would prove we were strong enough to survive it. Instead, all I could think was that she had wanted me to make the biggest decision of my life without knowing the person I was actually marrying. In the end, I called off the wedding. Making that phone call to the venue was strangely easier than calling our families. Every conversation felt like reopening the wound. Some people told me I was overreacting because everyone has a past. Others quietly admitted they would have done the same thing. The hardest part wasn't losing the wedding. It was packing away the future I had already built in my head. We divided furniture, canceled deposits, and returned gifts that had started arriving early. Every item felt like evidence of a life that had almost happened. She asked me more than once if we could start over. I'll tell you everything now, she said. I believe she meant it. But I also knew that honesty offered only after exposure doesn't feel the same as honesty offered freely. Before she moved out, she stopped at the door and looked back. I did love you. I know, I answered. That was the cruelest part. I never doubted her love. I doubted the version of me she believed could only love her if the truth stayed hidden. It's been 3 years since we ended our engagement, and I still catch myself thinking about her at the strangest moments. Not every day. Just often enough to remind me that healing isn't a straight line. People assumed the relationship ended because she had a daughter. It didn't. If she had told me the truth from the beginning, I honestly think I would have stayed. It would have been difficult, yes, but difficult isn't the same as impossible. What broke us wasn't her past. It was the years she spent deciding I didn't deserve to know it. Sometimes I wonder how Emily is doing. I hope she's happy. None of this was her fault, and I hate that the adults around her turned honesty into something so painful. I don't hate my former fiancé anymore. Mostly, I feel sad for both of us. She believed love depended on hiding the worst parts of herself. I believed love meant trusting someone without limits. Maybe we were both wrong. Now, whenever someone tells me, please don't ask about my past, I don't argue. I just quietly walk away, because I've learned that some closed doors aren't protecting peace. They're protecting secrets that eventually break everything.